Hello and welcome. Hello, everybody. Looks like we've already got quite a few people chatting away. Welcome to this week's ADSR Sound Design Sessions live stream. I will be your host, Brent March. It's good to be back, people. Last week I wasn't too well, so we missed last week. But yeah, it's great to be back and to see quite a few people welcoming in the chat. Hello. Try and do as many hellos as possible, and then we'll get going in about just under 5 minutes. And then we'll plan what we're looking at in today's live stream. Hopefully everyone can hear me and I'm not too loud or too quiet. I think I might be a tiny bit loud, to be honest. That might be better. So yeah, hello Riot Labari, hello Evil Myro, Widget, I can't pronounce that very well, I'm afraid. Hello Anna Kazazik, I'm terrible with names, I apologise in advance. Charan M, Jabranks 2012, Simple Sam, Dare Teams Music, Anandu KB, Shrivant Shedka, Mixwarp. I'm terrible with names. I'm so sorry. Hello, everyone. Yeah, hello, William C. I'm in response. Yeah, I'm finally better. For those of you who don't know, I did have the. I don't think anyone will have heard of it, but it's called coronavirus. But I hear it's not really a big thing apparently. But yeah, I'm fine now. It's good to be back, and this should be a fun one actually. This wasn't my idea. This was Ida's idea. I know Ida's a big up to Ida. She's big in the ADSR community on the chat. And yeah, it was Ida's idea. A couple of weeks ago, I was doing some Q&As on the Discord, so go and join the Discord if you have any questions. And someone asked, just have no idea where to start with sound design whatsoever. So I think that could be where Ida's maybe had the idea, but it's definitely something worth looking at. And I think this will be a great stream. I've got a good plan for it. Hello to Chris, definitely easier name. Paul, we won't be covering FM because really FM's not simple. This is sort of like a dummy's guide. So yeah. So if you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the stream on either Facebook, Twitch, or YouTube, as you already are doing, and I will come back and answer them at the end. And if you have anything bigger that you feel like you would maybe enjoy a video to be created around or a stream, join the Discord server and you can do just that. So let's have a look at what we're going to be actually looking at. So this is basically a completely beginner's guide to synthesis and sound design. And although it's a beginner's guide, it still can be it can still be quite confusing. This is basically for all of those people, and I was one of those people at one point, and I'm always learning, so there's still stuff I don't know by far. But when you load up, for example, your very first digital audio workstation, and you're looking at all the things you get, and for example, I think mine was, well, it was actually Audacity, but then it was Logic. I remember pulling up the synth and just like going through presets and having absolutely no idea. I actually thought that half this stuff was just like a graphic visual thing that to kind of look cool. I didn't realize it did stuff. So that was a while ago, but the feeling of just not understanding what any of those controls do, we can break them down into different things, different little modules, and we're going to do that in this stream. So to start off with, we're going to be looking at basic waveforms, and I'm going to be doing all of these across 3 or 4 different synths. As you can see on my screen here, I've got Serum, obviously, and I have Vital, and we did a little thing the other couple of weeks ago comparing Serum, Vital, and Pigments. I've also got Pigments, and I've also got this, which is basically Studio One, which is the DAW that I use, by the way. I have this, which is My Tai, and I just want to use as many synths as possible to illustrate what I'm going to be teaching today, because basically all of these principles are universal once you've learned them. Even if another synth has a totally different layout and graphically speaking, they're all the same. They all do more or less the same thing. Sure, you have a new thing that comes along and it's, the new kid on the block, for example, Pigments version 3, and has some cool new stuff in it, but really at the heart, they're all the same. So we'll be looking at basic waveforms: sine, triangle, square wave, and sawtooth. Already some people might be going like, sawtooth, what? So stay with me. Then we're going to move on to, I'm just reading off a list that I've prepared so I don't just go haywire. Then we're going to be moving on to filters. So again, if you are familiar with stuff like an EQ, filters not far from that at all, but they dramatically shape the sounds of what we create in synthesis. Then we'll look at our envelope. So in particular, the ADSR, which is obviously the name of this channel, and we'll get onto that in a bit, but that's attack, decay, sustain, release. And then after that, we're going to go into a couple more, not massive topics, but I mean, this could still be, but we're going to look at unison and layering sounds. Then we're going to look at pitch. Then we're going to look at effects within sounds. And I'm aware I'm listing a lot here, but let's just see what we can get through. And then I want to try and look at essential sounds and how we can create, say, a lead, a pad, a bass, sub bass. And then if we have time, we'll get on to other things as well, like maybe modulation and mod matrix. So yeah, that's the run of the mill today. Like I said, guys, if you have any questions at all, please feel free to leave them in the comments of the stream section wherever you're tuning in from. Don't forget to subscribe if you're enjoying this and hit the bell icon to be notified for future streams. Don't forget we have the ADSR community, which is growing over on Discord. So if you like this, obviously there's lots and lots of other streams on mastering, on mixing. We have the production challenge with lots of great hosts. So don't forget that we have all this year and more throughout the rest of the week. So yeah, let's get into it. So basically, I'll use a couple of these to illustrate my point, but my favorite synth is Pigments. I'm also a big fan of Serum, and in fact, I think Vital is awesome. We just did a thing on that, and it was really, really good. But we're going to start off here with Pigments, and I'm going to just make this smaller because I also have something that I'm using in the background. I mean, this will be really small, but it doesn't really matter. And I'll pin this, and then I'm just going to get this scope up. And basically the scope, although I'm not sure if I can resize it. It's as small as it'll go, sadly, but I can use that in a second. So basically I'm using the scope. It's a scope to just show you the wave forms that we're going to be looking at to help illustrate my point. Let's make this back a little bit bigger. So here's Pigments. Apologies if I just tore people's ears in half. Let's scroll down here at the first waveform. It would be nice if it showed us actually, if it actually said the waveform, but I suppose it's presuming you already have some knowledge. Maybe it does here. No. So, to begin, if you are going to want to learn synthesis, you basically have to understand waveforms. So waveforms, just think of them as they are like the essential sounds that make up the entirety of any synth sound you've ever heard, whether it be subtractive synthesis, which is what we'll be looking at today, and I'll explain that in a second, or it could be additive, or it could be FM or sample-based. Even sample-based is using waveforms in a way. So to start off with, we have this sine wave here. Let me just pull up that scope, and this will help illustrate my point. So first off, we have sine wave, which is the most pure waveform. It's just a single actual sine wave with no harmonics, as we can see. And as I play it lower down, we're going to get less harmonics. Let me just turn the volume up of this. Again, some of these you might not hear, by the way, because it's quite low down in the frequency range. That's better. So this is the sine wave. I mean, it's not mega pleasant to listen to right now, but in its purest form, a sine wave is just, as you can see on the screen right here. The higher I go up in pitch, we're going to get more of the squiggle sine wave lines, because basically the pitch, as you go higher, the sound waves and vibrations are traveling faster. So that's the first waveform. Now, all the other waveforms basically are derived from the sine wave. So if we go on to this next waveform, and I believe you can also do this with this position up, by the way. Just want to get that scope back up. So, just make sure I'm sticking to my plan. So this one that we're looking at now is a triangle. So it's quite similar, isn't it, to a sine wave? If you look at this triangle wave and what we had before with the sine wave, they are very, very, very similar. I'll just go back to that. And again, this triangle wave is basically the sine wave, but it has these, it's like a pyramid shape, isn't it? Or a triangle wave, obviously, because it's called a triangle waveform. So the difference with the triangle wave is it's a little bit sharper, a little bit brighter, and it has more odd harmonics. And basically the triangle wave and the square wave are built using odd harmonics, whereas the last thing we'll look at, the sawtooth, uses odd and even harmonics. But just for the purpose of learning these, it's probably best to just learn them by ear. So sine wave has this sort of like very pure sound. Triangle's a little bit more sharp and brittle, and you get a little bit more high frequency information. And we'll keep moving through here. Get my scope back up. So this is the sawtooth wave. Now the sawtooth wave is the only one which uses sawtooth wave is the only one that uses odd and even harmonics. None of this really matters, by the way. All that matters is that you can understand and listen to them, because if you can pick out what wave is, what is what, then that's all that matters, really. So this is our sawtooth, and as you can see, this is quite different to either the sine or the triangle wave because of the way that it is slanted. And that's because, like I said, it uses odd and even harmonics. And lastly, here we are. And this is our square wave. Again, I do apologize, not the most pleasant sound in the world, but... And again, same thing, we're going to get more as we go up in pitch. So basically, if you learn those 4 waveforms, as it says here, these are just the basic waveforms. We can get a lot more complex, but, again, this is a sort of a newbie's guide to synthesis. That's enough for now, and if I'm completely honest, most sounds that you hear in popular music will be created with some form of one of those 4 waveforms. So don't worry that, I only have 4 waveforms. It's not enough, because obviously if we go into basic waveforms and then we go down through the list here, we get tons, and you can even create your own waveforms, which is, something separate for another video. But essentially those 4 waveforms will easily make you any lead, any bass, any pad, any pluck, any sort of sound you want, you can make it with those 4 waveforms. So hopefully that is nice and simple. And if you have any questions about that, drop them now and I will pick them up at the end of the session. But yeah, I think everyone's doing okay for now. So the next thing that I was going to discuss is filters. So like I said, if anyone has any experience using something like an EQ, that's all a filter is. The funny thing is, and I'm not super knowledgeable about this, but the waveforms, there's actually a lot of mathematics and physics in there, sine waves and stuff, and the way they're built up. So basically, if you're a mathematician, you'll probably know more about it than me, but basically all of the waveforms are basically put into a synth, and in this case pigments, and they're allowed to oscillate within this synth when we send them MIDI information. So when I press the keyboard and it talks to the computer, all it's doing is oscillating that waveform, it's making it move. And then we have lots of other modules. So pigments is quite good in terms of layout. It looks sort of almost modular. You see how there's black lines here? So you can think of this engine as the waveform engine, and then we move over to these 2 engines, and these are the filters. So basically, the filters are a way to shape the sounds in terms of an EQ region. So what we have here is a multi-mode filter, and it has LP24. This is when things can start getting a bit like, whoa, it's going over my head already. So basically, that means low pass 24 or LP36, or you can have LP6. And as you can see, the nice thing about these wavetable synthesizers in the digital DAWs is you can see everything. It's quite visual, but basically what the 6, the 12, the 24, 36, etc., what that means is it's basically the steepness of the slope. And I'll do an extreme example. So 36 is as high as we can go here. So the values that they go up in, they get more and more steep. So this means it'll take off more high-end information as opposed to, for example, LP12 or something. So that's what LP36 means. So what I'll do now is I'm going to roll off this cutoff, and it currently says 20,000 hertz. Again, just try and take it with a pinch of salt and go away and try these things out for yourself. But all that 20,000 hertz is basically just an EQ point, a really, really, really high EQ point. I think that's basically as high as the human ear can here, from like 20 hertz down below, which you feel, which is sub bass, all the way up to 20. So you can't actually go past that, to be honest. The rest is almost like air, and then you get aliasing and stuff. But for now, 20 hertz, if I roll that off now, you will hear a noticeable change in the sound as long as this is going, the output of the waveform is going into the filter, which you can see it's going into filter 1. So as we can hear, it went beep, 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 beep. It's basically scooped off all of the top end of that waveform. And this is a way that we can basically subtract things from a complex sound to make them the desired sound we want. So just to quickly explain, you might have heard of terminology in synthesis such as like subtractive synthesis or additive synthesis or granular, which we did a couple of weeks ago. But basically, don't worry about any of that. If you know subtractive synthesis, you can figure out the rest of it really easily. Subtractive synthesis essentially is just getting something like this, a waveform, which is very complex, and you basically take things away from it. So for example, like here, we are taking away high-end information, or we could take away low-end information. And then we can do things like shape the way the sound evolves over time using an envelope and so on and so on. But that's what subtractive synthesis means. It means we are just basically taking things away from this signal and shaping it to the way that, we want to hear it in our head. So as you can hear, that's changed quite a bit. Now, I'll just show you the difference in the ladder pull style or low pass. Basically, if I had a 12 or a 6, there would be a lot more sharpness, and you will still hear quite a bit more top end as opposed to the 36 LP. That's quite sharp, a little bit duller, keep going, and we're losing more and more top end information. And that's as steep as we'll go. We can't do a 48 filter, but we are rolling off up to 4,000 hertz there, 4,080 to be specific. But that's what a filter is, basically. It's just shaping the sound of the waveform. And let's do that with a couple of the other waveforms that we looked at. So we have this one. And then we have our triangle. Triangle always sounds quite like a sine wave, and it's hard to depict if you have a filter on even more because you lose the top end information that a triangle gives you. And there's our sine wave. Okay, so pretty straightforward. There is loads and loads of filters though. So this is where things can get confusing, is, you can have loads of waveforms. I've only talked about 4, but there can be loads. Also, like I was saying, these synths are really good for visualizing things, and we do have loads of things here that let us to understand what's modulating what, or what the filter is doing in terms of a visual representation. But you can press this 2D button here, and it also lets you view the waveforms in a 2D form, which is quite nice. So try and use stuff like this to aid your sound design learning and education, because it just makes it easier, So back to the filters. This is a multi-mode filter, and the reason it's called a multi-mode filter is because basically it covers a lot of bases, because currently we're using LP. What that means is low pass. Low pass means it's going to let the lows pass through by taking off the high-end information. And the opposite of that would be HP. No, not Hewlett and Packard, the printers. HP as in high pass. So as you can imagine, that's the opposite of low pass. That means it's high passing the signal, letting the highs pass through. So if I go now to HP, let's do 36 because we're going from low pass 36 to HP 36. What this means is we're now going to basically be getting rid of all of the low end. So the complete opposite to before. So much so that I can't hear it. Use a better waveform, something with a lot of high end. So there you go. There's your LP, basically low pass, high pass. The high pass is letting the highs pass through. I just seen someone mention a comment there, and apologies if I don't pronounce your name correct, Jabranks, but you're absolutely right. Low pass is known as high cut because basically you are letting the lows pass through by cutting out the highs. And like I said, high pass, you're letting the highs pass through by cutting out the lows. Then we have a band pass, and basically band pass is like, think of the filter like this. This was low pass, letting the lows pass through, although on the camera it might look inverted. It'll probably be better if I go back to this. So this was low pass. As you can see, it's scooping off this side. Then high pass will be if you basically flipped it a mirror image. And then with band pass, you basically are taking out the low and the high. So it's doing both. So you get a very mid-range sort of sound, and you can obviously adjust other things. There's another control here, which we'll talk about while we're on with filters as well. So resonance, what resonance does is it basically creates a little node and it bumps the signal at the point of the cutoff. So if I do this, it'll tighten the actual EQ cue point at which this bandpass filter is getting rid of the lows and the highs. So think of the bandpass as almost like a low pass and a high pass combined. If I boost the resonance, it can go quite nasal and nasty and thin because we've lost literally so much information. But that's essentially what the notch does. And again, if I go back to like here, see there at the point of 500, or it'll move along with the cutoff. You hear it when you sweep along. It can be nasty or it can be really cool, great for plucks and stuff like that. So that's what the notch is. So bandpass, and then notch is basically the opposite of bandpass. So instead of getting rid of your high pass, instead of getting rid of your high end information and your low end information, it's basically just taking a notch in through the center like this. And again, Pigments is just great because of how bit visual it is. So if we sweep along, we're obviously going to get rid of a different region. So we could be getting rid of some frequencies round about the the low mids, or we could do right up near 20k again. And again, if we bump the resonance, it actually tightens the notch. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. So that's what the multi-mode filter is. Now, if I click on the mode, look at that. We've got low pass, surge, and SEM. There's absolutely loads here. These filters are nothing to worry about. These filters are all exactly the same as the multi-mode. There's basically very little difference. All it is they just have a different sound, a different quality, and they do a slightly different job. So, for example, SEM, Matrix 12, Mini Jupiter 8, all of these are basically derived from synths that were really, really famous, vintage synthesizers. Like the Jupiter 8 was this really famous synth. If you're more, in tune with guitars or something, think of it as Jupiter 8 was like a Les Paul, and then Mini is from a Moog Model D, a Mini Model D, and think of that as like a Strat. Basically, they both had qualities that made them unique, and then they have inspired and shape the way it sounds. Same with the Matrix 12, that's from another very popular synth, and SEM was, I think, from an Oberheim. So they all are just, they even look the same, but they have a slightly different quality to them. Then we get stuff like comb filters, which are a little bit more crazy, and phasers and formant, which is sort of like a vocal effect. But in essence, all of these filters are just taking things away from the sound in terms of an EQ region. So they're just subtracting either high, mid, or low information, or multiples of them three. So that's our filter. Pretty straightforward. If you have any questions on that, feel free to drop them in the comments. I'll try and come back to them at the end for sure. On the filter section of this particular synth, which is Pigments, we do have filter 1 and filter 2. They're no different. It's literally an exact duplication of this. A couple of weeks ago when I was doing stuff with Serum, I know hand to heart, I'm a big Serum fan, but I did starting to notice now that having that second filter is hugely important. We get 2 filters even in Vital, which is free. If you're someone who is watching this and you're not even aware of, like, where do I start? I don't have any of these things. Why would I buy it if I don't really even know what to do? Just go and get Vital, because Vital is free. So I would definitely pick up Vital at vital.audio. And we have a couple of streams on that and some content across the channel. But basically, 2 filters, it's a really, really good thing, because basically you can route different engines in different filters. You can also route one filter into the other. So you see where it says filter routing. I could send the signal into filter 1 and then send filter 1 into filter 2 and affect it again. But if you're looking at this and you're like, wait a minute, why is there 2 filters? It's just optionality. Filter 2 is exactly the same as filter 1. Yeah, the Buchla low pass scale, while I'm on, that is cool. There's some stuff like that. You see, the Buchla was a famous synth, much like the Juno and the Jupiter, etc., the Model D, etc. I've seen someone saying they've got some Moogs. That's awesome. But yeah, the Buchla was a famous synth, and it had it was actually like a West Coast modular synth. And yeah, that's what the filter section is. So now we shall move on to the envelopes. So that's down here in Pigments. I'm going to basically just demonstrate everything that I'm talking about in Pigments, and then I'm going to jump around the end into different synths to show you everything is universal. It just travels across all of these different synths. So the envelope, basically with the envelope, what you're doing is you're taking the sound and you're shaping the way that it is output over time using a voltage controlled amplifier. So in the olden days, modular, before you got semi-modular and then just, completely hardwired synths, you would have to patch your waveform into a voltage controlled amplifier, and then you had these controls: attack, decay, sustain, release. There's a couple of others here, but these basically are just shaping the sound even further. But really, again, another reason to get one of these synths, Vital, Pigment, Serum, whatever it is you fancy, is it's just so visual and you can see everything really, really nicely. Again, by the way, just to repeat sort of what I was talking about with filter 2, as you can see, envelope 2, envelope 3, we're not going to have to learn 3 different envelopes. This is exactly the same as these. It's just giving you more options so you can shape sounds and push boundaries, essentially, which is lovely, which is really nice. And like I said, Serum lacks now because it's older. It was like the original king. It doesn't have that second filter, but it does have multiple envelopes. So, envelope, I've got a nice little guide mnemonic, basically. So, the attack, I could basically talk about these and waffle on, but I've tried to consolidate them down into a nice, easy to imprint message. So attack is how long it takes for the synth to reach full volume. So this first control here, attack, all it means is when I hit my MIDI keyboard, or for example, you already have a thing in your DAW, a piece of MIDI information programmed. When you hit play or when you hit your MIDI keyboard, the attack is how quick is the sound going to come out once you've touched those keys. And I can demonstrate that for you right now. Now, if I have a really quick attack time, 0.0 milliseconds, that means the attack is immediate. It means as soon as I hit the note on the keys or you play something, it will just come straight back out of the speakers or the monitors or headphones, whatever it is. If I change the attack like this, we can even see the node moving up this graph. So it has a much slower attack time. And as you can understand, that is how we create stuff like pads. And basically the filters are a very, very strong point, but basically for my belief, I think that envelopes are the way that you shape your sound. A good 75% of the way you make a sound is basically around the envelopes. So attack, that's how long it takes for the synth to reach full volume. Then we have the decay control. So the decay is how long it takes for the synth to fade to its secondary volume. So once it's reached this point here, the decay is how long it's going to take to then reach the secondary volume. And people can get a little bit confused with decay and sustain because they sort of sound the same, they sort of do the same thing. But what's different is sustain is how loud the synth is after reaching the secondary volume. So decay is how long it takes for the synth to fade to its second volume. Sustain is how long the synth is how loud the synth is after reaching that secondary volume. So let's change the decay and the sustain sounds here. So there's the sustain, and this is controlling how loud the synth is after reaching the volume. And the decay is how long it'll take to get to the second volume. So pretty straightforward. I think people will understand this more once they actually do it themselves. Okay, last thing, release. Release is how long it takes for the synth to completely fade out. So if I bring in some release and I play something, take my hand off, we can see this is the attack, decay, sustain, and then from the sustain down to the end of the release point is how long it's going to take. And we can also get values. So look, we can do all the way up to 20 seconds, which is long. Can't really think of when you need it last 20 seconds. I mean, I'm sure there can be a circumstance. I might have just not came across it. Still going true to its word. But basically that's it. Those 4 controls. We do have a couple here. Another nice thing about pigments is we even get description. So look, envelope VCA underneath when I move. The time needed to go from the start to the max level. So if you can imagine up here is 100 in terms of volume. And then once it reaches there, it then hits the decay. The time needed to go from the max level of this is sustain, how long it's going to take to go from here to here. Sustain, the amplitude at which the envelope will be kept. So this is exactly what I just said before. And then releases the time it takes for the envelope to go back to zero. Zero in terms of volume. So pretty straightforward. Attack curve. Basically, this shapes the amount of the attack segment from exponential, logarithmic, linear, in between. In layman's terms, what it means is it changes the start of the attack curve in a different shape. So we can basically do it like it said. It can do it in an exponential or a logarithmic fashion. And what that means is it just changes the way the shape is. So here we have a negative value and it bounces out before it reaches the decay. And here we have the opposite, and it cinches in and then dramatically goes up, as we can see. So it's just another way to control the attack. And the same thing here for the decay curve. We get a little bit more control over the decay. So that is how we basically shape the sound of any source that comes from the wavetable or the waveform and control its sound emittance over time. It's pretty straightforward once you've tried it, but like I said, I don't know why I'm reaching for my sustain pedal because this sounds terrible anyway. It's not even a special sound, but I'm reaching for it anyway. But I'll try and play some chords. So if we want to make a pad, let's go back to the very start. If I wanted to make a pad, I would increase my attack. And then I would increase the decay. And the sustain would change. And put a slightly longer release. And there we go. That's how you basically create the beginnings of a pad. And then maybe if you wanted to make a pluck, you would shorten. You would shorten your attack, decay, and release. Okay, someone asking, does Stream have an attack curve parameter? I think it does, actually. I'm not 100%. I can have a look later on. But yeah, I think it might. Cool. So there we go. LFO. ADSR. Okay, next we are going to move on to Unison. So basically, so far, all of these sounds have been basically straight down the middle, almost mono. What we can do is we can use Unison, and what Unison does is it basically layers the sound. So what it's going to do is it's going to add voices and pan them in the stereo field to create the impression of a much bigger sound. And what you can do is you can introduce more voices here, and you stack them, and it basically puts them left and right in the stereo field. And what you can do is you can detune these, and that creates the impression that they are even wider, almost like a chorusing effect. And we can control the stereo here. We can control it so we don't go all the way. But let's have a listen to what happens when we introduce more voices. And I'll change my ADSR. Okay, so let's add in some voices. Again, if you are wearing good headphones, or monitors, it makes all the difference. So I've added in some voices then. It makes a huge, huge difference to the sound of the stereo field. If you want to use something like a stereo imager, not to change the image, but to visualize it, you can use a vector scope as well. Something like iZotope have a free vector scope. That'll help you understand this. And as I increase the voices, basically all it's doing is it's adding more voices in the stereo field to the sound, so it'll get richer. You can go all the way up to 8 here in Pigments. I think you can go further in Serum, but I know super mode here is like pushing the boundaries a little bit further. If we go back to classic unison mode though, we can go up to 8 voices. You can get quite a great sound, to be honest, with 3 voices. Now the detune here is going to detune the voices that are being panned left and right, and basically if you go further with this, you can get a little bit, you know, be careful, but you can get certain effect with it. So you've got to be careful with that control. Some people like the detune, they like to modulate it, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Some people like to modulate the detune to give what they can sometimes refer to as cold synths, like pigments and serum, because they are digital. They're not like, you know, these sort of things. Basically what it does is they can modulate the detune so it'll slightly waver the pitch, which gives it sort of like the non-linearities and the analog sound of, but to be honest, I just think that these things sound great, and it doesn't have to always be a homage to the analog like era. They sound good as they are. But unison is basically just layering voices on top of each other and spreading them out in the stereo field. And again, we can control that stereo amount there. But that's a really cool effect and something I'd recommend that you should try. Again, let's just hear this with the different waveforms. So sine. And we're going to change the filter, by the way. So far, that just shows you how a simple patch can sound really cool. Sine wave, I've cut off, I've shaped my envelope VCA, and I've literally just added some voices, and it sounds kind of cool on its own, doesn't it? So don't feel like, you know, just because you have this crazy amount of features and mod matrix, don't feel like you have to use it whatsoever. And we'll just go through a couple more quickly. So the triangles, again, got that bite. Try to remember what these different waveforms sound like. If there's one thing you take away, try and learn, oh, so sine wave is just a pure sine wave. Or triangle is a lot more odd harmonics. Pulse width. Not pulse width. Sawtooth. And lastly, we have a square. So starting to get sort of like those flumy sounds. I always seem to refer to them on these streams because I just love that feature bass with analog sort of sound. But yeah, starting to get that sort of like, it's like this almost modern vintage sound. Also, you know, you can play around with this position slider and sort of get a blend of these two. That's where wavetable synthesis is a little bit more advanced than just your typical subtractive synth. So we can basically blend between here a triangle and a sawtooth, or a sine and a sawtooth, a sine and a triangle, likewise. So that is unison and voice layering. Like I was saying, we're already getting a kind of cool sound there, so just shows you with a little bit of knowledge you can start making your own patches easily. Okay, next up on the list is the LFO. I think LFO is something that confuses the living daylights out of people, because if I'm completely honest, I don't think they should have called it back in the day an LFO, because LFO stands for a low frequency oscillator. And as soon as you say that, I think it makes people think like, oh, it's another one of these, it's another waveform. But because these waveforms, you know, sine, sine, triangle, sawtooth and square, the basic waveforms, they are oscillators. But the low frequency oscillator is not an oscillator. So basically LFO, it stands for low frequency oscillator, and the sort of semantics behind the word, if you will, they should have, the better description for an LFO actually is, if you go in this function tab, this basically is the same thing as an LFO, but it's just not given the name LFO, and it's got a little bit more advanced shaping capabilities. But I just think they shouldn't have called it an LFO. But anyway, rant over. The LFO stands for low frequency oscillator, and that's because typically it will most commonly modulate within the regions of low frequencies. But again, I think that's exempt because you can use it for loads and loads of things. You can apply it to anything you want. But essentially, for those of you wanting the, too long didn't read, the LFO is usually used to modulate something else. And again, once this word starts coming up, people are like, what, modulate? So basically what I could do is I could use this shape here to modulate a parameter in the synth. Parameter, I mean like a control. So the most common use case for an LFO is to use it to modulate the cutoff of your filter. And I'll show you how we do that now. You can do that loads of ways in Pigments. You can press the little cross here, and then you can basically adjust your LFO slider in the mod matrix. So as you can see, I did that there. Or you can go onto the desired thing that you want to use as the modulator. And then what we can do is you can basically assign it here like that. So there's loads and loads of ways you can do it, but let's just get rid of it and just do it the way I started. So if you click the little plus, and then what we'll do is we'll just boost this LFO, and now you'll see, again, I think that's why these are a fantastic way to learn. As you can see, the multimode filter is literally moving back and forth, and it's doing so over a certain hertz range. Hertz is just basically a measurement of time. We can do it in binary triplets or sync dotted. So you can basically apply this LFO to go at a certain rate. So if I do this, watch the multimode filter going much quicker. So what it's going to do is it's going to open and close the filter because this LFO down here is telling it to. Pigments' modulation matrix, which shows what something is affecting something else. It's basically here, this little strip, and it shows you, as you can see, it's moving. That means something's happening. So let's have a listen. Actually sounds like an alarm in like a school. So let's change the rate. And you can change the shape of the waveform. So look, sine wave. Remember we've been learning what these look like and sound like. But remember, it's just actually using it as a shape. This is not creating a sound. It's just applying this shape to the modulation. So let's hear the difference between sine wave and triangle for modulation. So the triangle's a little bit sharper. You can change the symmetry. Make it fold in on itself more. It's actually moving there into more like square wave territory and sawtooth. Now we're in square. So you can hear that's almost like a gating effect. Maybe if I pull back the hertz range. And let's try this, that's sample and hold, separate video for that one maybe. And let's try some of those different modes. So triplets. Pretty straightforward. So that is the LFO. Again, in Pigments and Serum and Vital, blah, 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 blah. LFO 1, LFO 2, LFO 3, they're all the same thing. No different. It's just options. You can use them basically in different ways. So that is LFO. By the way, while we're here, this function thing is exactly the same as an LFO. You can just shape it more and add more breakpoints and curves by double clicking like this. But as you can see, I'll get rid of this LFO here and apply the function control to the cutoff. And as you can hear, this will sound more almost not identical, but because the shape's different, but it's just an advanced LFO is the way of describing it. And we can change loads of things with this, like the sync rate. So function's really, really cool. We can do tons with that. I think you can draw it in with a pencil. Yeah, down here you can draw it in with a pencil and stuff as well, which is really cool. And it also has loads of presets. So if you want to learn, just do this, and then you'll be like, oh, cool, that's how you create a really, really cool function. Pretty awesome sound, if you ask me. So I love pigments for these reasons. They sound really, really cool. So that is what the LFO is, guys. We use it mainly to modulate other things, and we can change the shape of the LFO depending on what we want. And yeah, we can assign it loads of things. Just before I move on, another really common use for an LFO is to use it to cycle through a wavetable. So like I was saying before, you can blend between different waveforms, but what we can do is we can use an LFO to say I want to go all the way through the waveform, and again I'll use LFO1 like this, and as you can see, it's going to now modulate through the waveform. Pretty straightforward, but really cool. That's a really, really common use, is to modulate through a waveform. Hopefully everyone's sticking with me and this isn't going over anyone's heads, but so far, just to recap, we've looked at basic waveforms. We've looked at using a sine, a triangle, a square, and a sawtooth wave, and I was showing you those with an oscilloscope. We then looked at the filters, this section here. We then looked at, just to quickly explain, the filters is a way of shaping the sound using basically an EQ decision. Then we looked at the ADSR, our envelopes, and this is a way of shaping the sound over time. And then we've just looked at unison and layering to make the sound wider. And we also looked at LFO. Okay, so for the last sort of 15, let's talk about pitch and effects. So a big part of wanting to create these sounds, now you understand waveforms, filters, and how you shape the sound over time, is how the pitch range is occupied. So if I'm creating a pad, what I have now is quite fine, to be honest. I'm going to get rid of this modulation point for now, because I can see it's moving this. If I wanted to make this a bass sound, there's something really, really wrong. And that is, it's just tuned to the wrong octave. So a big part of synthesis is just learning what goes where. So in terms of a bass sound, that's much more like a bass sound, isn't it? Because it's tuned down the octave. It's going to shape it a bit. Cool. I mean, I could go even further, couldn't I? So 12 semitones, by the way, is an octave. If you want to go another octave down, you need to double that. So what's 2 times 12? Fun with Brent and maths, 24. Should have been a school teacher. So here we go. Still got unison on there, which is cool. It's actually giving this a bit of a sound, but if we took it off, there we go. So if you want to change the range of the pitch, it'll get you to your desired effect. Likewise, if wanted to make this a lead, probably going to have to pitch it up so that it stands out in the mix or the performance. So there you go. I've made this into a bit more of a lead now. By the way, I'm just writing the mod wheel. That's what's making it go like whoa, 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 whoa. And then there's no right and wrong. I feel like I say this every week, but pick whatever waveform you want. So don't forget about pitch, just a little thing there. Okay, and then the final thing, which I feel is really, really important, which either, if we think about synthesis in 3 different forms, if it was back in the olden days, or as you can see, I do have some synths behind me here. This one is an Odyssey. This is mainly used for arps and basses because it's monophonic. And then I have these 2, which are better for like leads and creating pads. If I wanted to affect the sound of them more, I would use external effects. Now, unfortunately, my camera's not facing them, but I've got a lot of effects on the floor. I'm sure you'll have heard of some of these like products like Strymon Big Sky and Timeline. So they are delays and reverbs and saturation. But then if you were in the digital domain, as we are right now, you don't need all that stuff. You've got them here. So delay, reverb, we can have choruses, we can have compressors, we can have, so it's even grouped them as we can see. So filter, dynamic controls, distortion, time-based mod, and so on. So really, really easy to understand. Just turn them on, try them, and see what happens. So delay is basically, I think a lot of people will be familiar with all these effects, but it's worth running through them. Delay is basically timed repeats of the sound over time in the left and right stereo field. Reverb is placing the sound in a space. So for example, a room or a hall or a cathedral, or it could be something like a non-linear environment. Then the dynamic stuff, compressors, are basically going to attenuate the signal so that it's more it's less dynamic and it's more even and consistent. Basically, imagine if you had a part of the music that was crazy loud and then a part that's crazy quiet. Well, it's not very nice for the human ear. So a compressor will even out the peaks and the troughs, but separate video. Distortion. If you've ever been into guitar and stuff, the first thing you ever bought with a guitar was a distortion pedal. It basically is either soft or hard clipping, and we have some even more severe versions like bit crushers and wave folders. Really, really cool stuff. Time-based, these are just the same as the delay. And the reverb, PS delays, pitch shifted delay, really cool effect. Again, separate video. And then modulation is just basically a form of delay, but with the repeat value changed over time. So chorus is really, really common on synths. So it spreads the signal out over time. A little bit like Unison in a way. You get some really great effects with it. Again, chorus June 6, that's just basically chorus named after a legendary synth, a bit like the filter section. Phaser, if you've ever heard of things are out of phase, all this is doing is basically changing the phase polarity between the left and the right speakers. So it creates like this effect. You hear that? Like... Oh yeah. And then phaser, we have flanger, which is similar. I'll just play. You can hear it changes the pitch fluctuations over time. And again, BL20 flanger, it's just named after a famous unit. So it's again, just a filter. But most commonly on synths, you're going to want to slap a bit of delay on, a bit of reverb, maybe a bit of chorus. Let's have a listen. I'm just going to crank the volume. Okay, and let's start to build our sound to make it more interesting. So almost an hour's worth, and all you need to know is your waveforms, your filters, shape your sound with your ADSR, maybe use an LFO to modulate parameters of the synth. So for example, I might use LFO to modulate cutoff. And there you go, you're starting to build the patch yourself. This is great if you want to tweak patches as well, if you're like, oh, I like that, but it's just not quite how I want it. And there we go. I've put it in an environment, a room decay. I'm just going to change how long the reverb will decay over time. And again, here is our delay. Ping pong will spread it stereo width a bit further. Really cool. If we pull the cutoff back further, it'll modulate it at a different pace and parameter. Cool. We can get some crazy effects here as well. Wave folding. So there you go. The effects section is something that is worth paying attention to as well. So I think that's just about it. I did have other things to look at, like how to build essential sounds, but I think you can probably understand how you can do that now, given what I've been looking at with just creating a pad there or a lead or a bass. So yeah, what I had left was basically lead. Again, these aren't correct, but they're just most common. Is lead will you typically use a square or a saw waveform, pad, square or a saw, bass, triangle, square, saw, sub bass very commonly uses sine waves, and even kick drums often use a sine wave to reinforce the sound. And we also have a sound design session on the playlist about creating your own kicks. So yeah, that was basically it. So I will quickly just show you these synths and then I'll come to comments, but look at Vital. So here we go. Look, oscillator, 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 3 oscillators, and there's our waveforms. No difference, just a different layout. Oh, look over here, envelope 1, attack, decay, sustain, release, exactly the same. LFO, oh look, filter. So it's exactly the same. Oh look, effects. So all of it is really, really quite a, it's once you've learned it, you'll know it across all of them. Let's have a look at serum. Oh look, oscillator, oscillator. Oh, there's the filter. Here's our LFO. Here's our envelope. Yeah, pretty straightforward. Someone asking before. Yes, there is an attack curve point. I thought there was. And then this one is the PreSonus one that comes free with the software. But look, this one's probably the most different. But here's oscillator. Here's our waveforms across the top. Oscillator 2, it's exactly the same thing. Just another one if you want to get a little bit more complex with your sound. There's our filter. There's our amp envelope. More envelopes, they're exactly the same thing, just more options. LFO and effects at the bottom. They are all the same. I hope I've drilled that into people, but hopefully not too much. I'm just going to have a quick meander through the questions, see if there's anything. Thank you, Drunk Bishop. That's really, really kind. Love your sound design sessions. I learn more and more each time. That's great. And I'm pleased that I'm doing it at a pace that people can follow. Apparently I created something from the Eurythmics. I'll try and find some actual comments. Yeah, pigments. People talk about pigments. You should maybe grab a free trial if you want to see if it's for you. People saying LFO confuses you. Yeah, me too. Yeah, serum does have an attack curve parameter as we just looked at. Someone talking about portamento. We didn't quite get onto that, but that's a cool effect as well. Just another little thing, a bit like Unison. Low pass, also known as high cut. Absolutely correct. Pulse width, we'll save that for another one just because, time is not on our side for the next 3 minutes. No, I'm not single. Get some strange questions on here. Someone I learned how to incorporate my iPad Pro to use the person's remote. Oh, do you mean the PreSonus remote, maybe? William Beckham? That's cool, though. Restream, I'm just looking at. I can't really scroll down through the Facebook messages on the Restream chat, which is annoying. So apologies if you had a question and I didn't get to it on Facebook or Twitch. But yeah, so I hope that everyone found that useful. And, if you're a newbie or if you're someone who is a seasoned pro, maybe there's something in there for you. A couple of questions before I go. How can we get better at sound designing? Just do it all the time. You just have a curious mind is what I'd say. If there's some patch that you've pulled up from a preset that someone's designed and you're like, that sounds great, maybe look into how is it great? What is the main thing? Because remember, it's just a waveform with a filter and an envelope, and patches are all fairly similar. You just have slightly new things. Someone about using glides. I don't know if maybe they're on about portamento, but yeah, I'm not entirely sure there, I'm afraid. Cool. I think that will probably do us for this session. That was loads and loads of fun. It was great to be back. And just to reiterate, the stream's going on throughout the week. There is the summer sale on right now as well. If there's a link in the chat, adsr.com summer sale for 2021. So if you're in the market for some new sounds or anything, the place to go to, or head over to the Discord where there's loads of things going on, like the production challenge and just a great community and asking questions. I'm always popping in there every now and then. So if you have a question you feel like you've missed out, don't worry, head over there and there'll always be someone there to address or make some good friends with. So thanks very much, people. Some really, really kind things thanks for, I'm glad I'm back too. Thank you, Louis Torres, Simple Sam, William C. Void. There's been a great turnout today. I hope everyone's learned something. I had a lot of fun. And yeah, I guess I'll see you all next week. I hope you all have a great week. Signing off. Goodbye.